The town of Willow Creek had always been a place of quiet charm and picturesque beauty. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. My wife Emily and I moved here shortly after our wedding, looking for a fresh start away from the bustle of city life. We bought a cozy house at the end of Maple Street, a quaint two-story home with a white picket fence and a garden that Emily lovingly tended to. Emily was a vision of grace and warmth, the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. She worked as a freelance graphic designer from home, while I managed a local hardware store. Our life was simple, comfortable, and to anyone looking in from the outside, perfect. We had no children by choice, preferring to enjoy each other's company and the freedom that came with it. We spent our evenings cooking together, watching movies, or sitting by the fireplace, lost in conversation. Our weekends were filled with long walks in the nearby woods, visits to the local farmers market, and gatherings with friends. Emily had a close-knit group of friends she had known since childhood, and they often came over for dinner or a glass of wine on the porch. It was during one of these gatherings that I first began to notice the subtle changes in Emily's behavior, the little things that would eventually shatter the illusion of our perfect life. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Emily became more guarded with her phone, a device she once left carelessly around the house. She began to take it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, it was 2024, and everyone seemed glued to their screens. Then there were the late-night work sessions. Emily, who used to be in bed by 10, began staying up later and later, claiming she had tight deadlines to meet. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find her office light still on, the soft hum of her computer filtering through the door. When I asked if she needed help or if something was wrong, she would smile and reassure me that everything was fine, just a particularly busy period. But it wasn't just the phone and the late nights. There were other, more subtle changes. Emily had always been affectionate, but now her touches felt distant, almost mechanical. She would pull away from my embrace quicker than usual, and our conversations became shorter, more superficial. The deep, meaningful talks we used to have were replaced by small talk and awkward silences. Her appearance began to change as well. Emily had always taken care of herself, but now she seemed to be putting in extra effort. She started dressing more provocatively, even when she had no plans to go out. I would catch her smiling at her phone, lost in her own world, only to quickly hide the screen when I walked into the room. One evening, while we were having dinner with her friends, I noticed something else. Emily's best friend, Claire, seemed unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact with me. Claire and I had always gotten along well, and her sudden reticence struck me as odd. When I tried to engage her in conversation, she responded with short, clipped answers, casting nervous glances at Emily. After everyone had left, I confronted Emily about Claire's behavior. "Is everything okay with Claire? She seemed off tonight," I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Emily's response was defensive, almost too quick. "She's just going through some personal stuff. It's nothing to worry about," she said, brushing off my concerns with a wave of her hand. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next few days were a haze of worry and doubt. I began to watch Emily more closely, looking for any signs that might explain her behavior. The more I observed, the more convinced I became that there was something she wasn't telling me. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, I decided to check her phone. Emily had fallen asleep in her office again, and I tiptoed downstairs, heart pounding in my chest. I found her phone on the desk, but it was locked. I felt a surge of frustration and fear. This wasn't like me. I wasn't the paranoid type, but something was definitely wrong, and I needed to know what it was. The next morning, I decided to talk to her directly. Over breakfast, I broached the subject. "Emily, I've noticed you've been a bit distant lately. Is everything okay? Is there something we need to talk about?" She looked up from her coffee, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. "I'm just stressed from work, that's all." "You're overthinking things," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing rapidly. As the days went by, my suspicions only deepened, fueled by her continued secrecy and the growing distance between us. It felt like I was living with a stranger. the woman I loved slipping further and further away from me. The tension between us was becoming unbearable. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to navigate the unspoken distance that had crept into our marriage. Emily's behavior was increasingly erratic, her mood swinging wildly from affectionate to hostile with little warning. One Friday evening, after another week of Emily's late nights and guarded behavior, I decided to confront her once and for all. I came home early from work, determined to have a heart-to-heart conversation. But as I walked up to our house, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Emily's car was in the driveway, but there was another car parked next to it, one I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I approached the front door. I quietly let myself in, hoping against hope that there was some innocent explanation. But the moment I stepped inside, I heard the unmistakable sound of hushed voices and muffled laughter coming from the living room. I moved silently down the hallway, the voices growing clearer with each step. Peering around the corner, I saw Emily on the couch, entwined with a man I had never seen before. They were locked in a passionate kiss, oblivious to everything around them. My vision blurred with rage and betrayal. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, my world collapsing around me. I had suspected something was wrong, but seeing it with my own eyes was a different kind of pain, a raw, searing agony that threatened to overwhelm me. "Emily!" I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. They broke apart, Emily's face draining of color as she looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. The man beside her quickly stood up, a look of panic on his face. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded, pointing at him. Emily stammered, trying to find her voice. "Jake, This isn't what it looks like," she began, but I cut her off. "Don't lie to me, Emily," I shouted, the words echoing in the room. "I've seen enough to know exactly what this is." The man stepped forward, hands raised defensively. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married," he said, his voice shaky. "I am sorry." "Sorry?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think sorry is going to fix this?" I turned back to Emily, my anger boiling over. "How could you do this to me? To us?" I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. "After everything we've been through, how could you betray me like this?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I was too angry to care. She tried to reach out to me, but I stepped back, not wanting her to touch me. "Jake, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Explain? There's nothing to explain," I said bitterly. "You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now you're caught." I looked at the man who was inching towards the door, clearly wanting to escape the confrontation. "Get out," I said coldly, "and don't ever come back." He didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the door, leaving Emily and me alone in the wreckage of our marriage. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with all the things left unsaid. Emily collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, the wounds too deep. I stood there for a moment, staring at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved and trusted. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out the front door, leaving her cries echoing behind me. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. My world had been shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The days following the discovery were a blur of rage and heartbreak. I couldn't go back to the house. I couldn't face Emily. Instead, I stayed with a friend, trying to process what had happened, trying to figure out what to do next. The betrayal had cut deep, and all I could think about was how to make Emily feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. It was during one of these sleepless nights that an idea began to form. I remembered that Emily was set to attend a high-profile charity gala that she had been planning for months. It was one of the biggest events in our small town, and everyone who was anyone would be there. She had been looking forward to it for weeks, talking about how it was going to be the highlight of her year. I decided that it would be the perfect opportunity to exact my revenge. If she was going to humiliate me, then I would return the favor in front of everyone she knew and cared about. It was a petty, vindictive plan, but in my state of mind, it seemed like the only way to get back at her. I spent the next few days gathering evidence of her affair. I went through her phone records, printed out copies of the explicit messages and photos, and compiled everything into a neat, damning folder. I even managed to get a hold of some CCTV footage from a local cafe where she had met with her lover on more than one occasion. On the night of the gala, I dressed in my best suit and headed to the venue. I wasn't on the guest list, but I knew most of the staff and managed to slip in without much trouble. The ballroom was decorated with glittering lights and elegant floral arrangements, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I spotted Emily almost immediately. She was standing near the stage, talking animatedly with a group of people. She looked stunning in a red dress, her smile radiant, but all I could see was the betrayal lurking beneath her polished exterior. I waited until she was alone, then approached her. The moment she saw me, her smile faltered. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "I thought I'd join the festivities," I replied, my tone cold. Before she could respond, I made my way to the stage. The MC was in the middle of announcing the next speaker, but I interrupted, grabbing the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone. I have an important announcement to make," I said, my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I caught sight of Emily, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Many of you know my wife, Emily. She's been the driving force behind this event, putting in countless hours to make it a success. But what you might not know is that she's also been very busy in other areas of her life. I opened the folder and began reading excerpts of the messages aloud, showing the photos and videos to the crowd. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room as the reality of the situation sank in. Emily's face turned red, her eyes filling with tears. But I pressed on, fueled by a dark satisfaction. "This is the woman who promised to love and honor me," I continued, my voice rising. "This is the woman who has been lying and cheating behind my back. I wanted you all to see the real Emily, the one she's been hiding." I tossed the folder onto the floor, its contents scattering across the stage. The room was buzzing with shock and disbelief, people whispering and pointing, their eyes flicking between Emily and me. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving Emily to deal with the fallout. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside, but it did little to cool the anger burning inside me. I had exposed her, humiliated her, just as she had done to me. But as I walked away from the venue, a part of me wondered if it was worth it, if this act of revenge had truly healed any of the wounds she had inflicted. The truth was, I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the way things were, and this was the only way I knew how to move forward. The aftermath of my public revelation was more intense than I had anticipated. The entire town was buzzing with the scandal. Emily's reputation was in tatters, and I had become both a hero and a villain, depending on whom you asked. The fallout was swift, and I knew I had to face Emily one last time to finalize our separation. A few days after the gala, Emily called and asked to meet at the house. I hesitated but agreed. We had been living apart since the discovery, and I needed to collect the rest of my belongings. When I arrived, the house felt strangely foreign, filled with memories that now seemed tainted. Emily was sitting in the living room, her face drawn and her eyes puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, a mixture of anger and sadness in her gaze. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Sorry doesn't change what you did, Emily," I said, my voice hard. "You lied to me, you cheated, and you betrayed our marriage." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I demanded. "Why throw away everything we had for some fling?" Emily looked down, wringing her hands. "It wasn't just a fling, Jake. It was a way to escape. I felt trapped, suffocated. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like I was disappearing." I shook my head, anger bubbling up again. "So you thought the best solution was to have an affair, to lie and sneak around behind my back?" "I know it was wrong," she whispered. "I was selfish and stupid. But please, Jake, I want to make things right. I want to try and fix this." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the quiet room. "Fix this? How do you propose we do that, Emily? You destroyed the trust between us. There's nothing left to fix." She stood up, reaching out to me. "We can go to counseling, work through this together. I love you, Jake. I don't want to lose you." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "It's too late for that. I can't be with someone I don't trust. We need to move on separately." Her face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, sobbing. "Please, Jake, don't do this. Don't leave me," I sighed, feeling a pang of sadness despite everything. "I already have, Emily. I left the moment you chose him over me. This is just the final step." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of our broken marriage hanging heavily in the air. Finally, I stood up, ready to leave. "I'll be in touch about the divorce proceedings. We can sort out the details through our lawyers." Emily didn't respond, her sobs the only sound in the room. I walked out, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter of our life together was closing, and while it was painful, it was also necessary. As I drove away from the house, I couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but it was a journey I needed to take. Emily had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. I pulled over to the side of the road, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I needed to rebuild my life, piece by piece, away from the shadows of betrayal and heartbreak. The weeks leading up to the divorce trial were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and emotionally charged phone calls. Emily and I communicated through our attorneys, avoiding direct contact as much as possible. The house was officially up for sale, and I had found a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was a place to start over. The day of the trial arrived with a sense of finality. I stood outside the courthouse, taking deep breaths and trying to steady my nerves. My lawyer, Karen, a tough, no-nonsense woman with years of experience in family law, joined me, her expression confident and reassuring. "Ready?" she asked, giving me a firm nod. I nodded back, though I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was about to happen. We walked into the courtroom together, the atmosphere tense and formal. Emily was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She looked tired, her eyes hollow and her shoulders slumped. The sight of her stirred conflicting emotions within me, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about closure and moving forward. The proceedings began, and each side presented their case. Karen laid out the evidence of Emily's infidelity, including the messages, photos, and videos. Emily's lawyer tried to argue that the affair was a symptom of a larger problem in our marriage, that we had grown apart due to my long hours at work. But Karen was relentless, countering every point with calm precision. When it was Emily's turn to testify, she spoke softly, her voice trembling. She admitted to the affair, but tried to shift some of the blame onto me, saying that my emotional distance had driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. I listened, my jaw clenched, resisting the urge to interrupt. Finally, it was my turn. I took the stand and recounted the events leading up to the discovery of the affair. I talked about the changes in Emily's behavior, the night I caught her, and the fallout that followed. I emphasized the betrayal, the lies, and the impact it had on our relationship. My voice was steady, but inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. The judge listened intently, his expression neutral. When both sides had finished presenting their arguments, he took a moment to review the evidence. The silence in the courtroom was palpable, everyone holding their breath, waiting for the decision. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the breakdown of this marriage is due to Mrs. Thompson's infidelity. Mr. Thompson has demonstrated a commitment to the marriage, and it is understandable that he feels betrayed by his wife's actions." He paused, looking directly at Emily. "Mrs. Thompson, your behavior has shown a lack of respect for your husband and your marriage. The court finds in favor of Mr. Thompson's petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery." My heart pounded as he continued, outlining the terms of the divorce. I was granted the majority of our joint assets, including the proceeds from the sale of the house. Emily was to receive a smaller settlement, enough to help her get back on her feet, but not more than she deserved. The judge also acknowledged the emotional distress I had suffered, a small victory that validated my feelings. When it was over, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The marriage was officially over, a chapter closed with the finality of a judge's gavel. I walked out of the courtroom, Karen by my side, feeling lighter but also weary. "You did well," Karen said, giving me a reassuring pat on the back. "It's over now. You can move on." I nodded, grateful for her support. As I left the courthouse, I saw Emily standing alone, her lawyer having already departed. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I considered walking over to her, saying something, anything to acknowledge the years we had spent together. But I couldn't. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Instead, I walked past her, out into the bright sunlight. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. The trial had given me the closure I needed, and now it was time to rebuild, to find out who I was, without the shadow of Emily's infidelity hanging over me. As I drove back to my apartment, I felt a sense of resolve. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a chance to start anew, to create a life built on trust and honesty. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead. The weeks following the trial were a period of quiet reflection and gradual rebuilding. The initial relief of the divorce settlement had given way to a profound sense of emptiness, a void where my marriage had once been. I moved into my small apartment, focusing on making it feel like home. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a blank slate on which to start over. I threw myself into my work at the hardware store, taking on extra shifts and projects to keep my mind occupied. My colleagues were supportive, understanding the need for distraction, and gradually, my days began to take on a new rhythm. It was different, but it was a start. One Saturday, as I was reorganizing the store's inventory, an old friend, Tom, walked in. He had heard about the divorce and suggested we catch up over a drink. I hesitated at first, but then agreed. It had been a long time since I had allowed myself to relax and simply enjoy someone's company. We met at a local bar, a cozy place with dim lighting and a relaxed atmosphere. As we chatted, I found myself opening up about everything that had happened. The affair, the confrontation, the trial. Tom listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement and reminding me that I wasn't alone. "You've been through hell, Jake," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "But you're still standing. That counts for something." His words resonated with me. For so long I had felt like a victim, defined by Emily's betrayal. But now, as I looked around the bar, I realized that I had the power to redefine myself, to reclaim my life and my happiness. Over the next few months, I made a conscious effort to reconnect with old friends and explore new interests. I joined a local hiking group, finding solace in the great outdoors. The physical exertion and the beauty of nature were therapeutic, helping me clear my mind and focus on the present. One weekend, the hiking group planned a trip to a nearby mountain range. It was an ambitious hike, but I felt ready for the challenge. As we set out on the trail, I found myself walking beside a woman named Sarah. She was new to the group, friendly and down to earth, with a quick wit that made the miles seem shorter. We talked as we climbed, sharing stories about our lives and our struggles. Sarah had gone through her own divorce a few years earlier and understood the pain and uncertainty I was feeling. Her empathy and strength were inspiring, and for the first time, I felt a genuine connection with someone new. After the hike, we exchanged numbers and began to see each other regularly. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding. Sarah was patient, never pushing me to move faster than I was comfortable with. She became a steady presence in my life, a source of support and encouragement as I continued to heal. As the seasons changed, so did my outlook on life. The apartment I had moved into out of necessity began to feel like home, filled with personal touches and memories of new experiences. I took up photography, capturing the beauty of the places I visited and the people I met. It was a way to document my journey, a reminder of how far I had come. One evening, Sarah and I were sitting on my balcony watching the sunset. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, a stunning backdrop to the peaceful moment we were sharing. She turned to me, her eyes soft and warm. "Jake, I know it's been a tough journey for you," she said, her voice gentle. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." I reached out and took her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude and affection. "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. "You've been a big part of my healing. I'm so glad we found each other." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sun dipping below the horizon. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that had eluded me for so long. Reflecting on the past year, I realized how much I had grown. The pain of Emily's betrayal had been a catalyst for profound change, forcing me to confront my fears and rebuild my life from the ground up. I had learned to value myself, to recognize my worth, and to seek out relationships that were built on trust and mutual respect. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt like an opportunity rather than a threat. I had a new life, filled with new possibilities and the promise of happiness. And with Sarah by my side, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the journey I had been on. It had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live my life to the fullest. The road ahead was open, and I was ready to take the next step, wherever it might lead. With a heart full of hope and a newfound sense of purpose, I closed my eyes and drifted into a peaceful sleep, dreaming of the bright future that awaited me.